A silent portrait arrived in a weather-worn package, its edges stiff with age, its meaning buried under a century of dust. Two men stood frozen in its frame, one draped in wealth, the other bound in quiet obedience. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. A plantation heir posing beside the enslaved man he claimed to command. But the longer the archivist stared, the more the image pressed back, carrying a truth no one had dared to name. Hidden in the servant's clasped hands and reflected faintly in the heir's expression was something deeper than power or pretense. Something forbidden. Something that never should have survived the era that tried to bury it. And once the experts uncovered the truth concealed between those two men, the portrait stopped being a relic. It became a confession, one that would rewrite an entire family's legacy and expose a secret no plantation ledger ever recorded. If you're drawn to hidden histories, unsettling discoveries, and the moments where long-buried truths finally demand to be heard, you're in the right place. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another deep dive documentary. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories back into the light. The portrait arrived wrapped in rough paper, carrying no hint of its journey except a crisp label bearing the archivist's name. Two men stood frozen in that frame, their expressions carved with unsettling stillness. At first glance, the photograph resembled countless plantation-era images designed to mask brutality behind staged civility. One man stood draped in tailored wealth, while the younger servant beside him held a posture forged through enforced obedience and imposed silence. Yet something inside that image resisted easy interpretation. The archivist felt it immediately, a pressure beneath the surface, as though the portrait guarded a truth waiting for someone patient enough to uncover its hidden pulse. The anonymous note accompanying the portrait hinted at something forbidden. Its words warned that appearances deceive, urging careful examination. Such cautions rarely accompanied historical artifacts unless someone feared the consequences of what might be discovered. The archivist positioned the photograph beneath intense archival lighting. Every crease, shadow, and fold became magnified. Still, nothing immediately revealed itself except a faint tension between the two men, a tension no lens could fully disguise. The elite plantation heir stood confident and immovable, yet his gaze carried something unspoken. The servant's posture appeared compliant, but a subtle defiance lingered at the edges, as though he carried knowledge he refused to surrender. The archivist leaned closer, compelled by instinct. His trained eye sensed inconsistencies, a faint resemblance in bone structure, an echo shared between the faces. But instinct required proof, and proof demanded deeper analysis. He contacted his colleague, a forensic specialist renowned for exposing truths concealed within aging photographs. Both men understood the weight of images like this, how they preserved lies as easily as they preserved history. When the specialist arrived, he began inspecting the portrait with meticulous precision. He marked distances between eyes, angled jawlines, and subtle contours shaped by ancestry. Slowly, similarities emerged that neither man could comfortably dismiss. The measurements aligned too closely to be coincidence. The heir and the servant shared structural echoes that suggested blood, a lineage intentionally unspoken. Their resemblance whispered of a connection forged in violation and hidden through force. This discovery unsettled both professionals. They knew the era's darkest truths. Men in power frequently abused enslaved men, erasing the resulting sons into servitude. Yet documentation rarely exposed such acts with undeniable clarity. The archivist felt a chill as the specialist confirmed the facial mapping results. The two men were almost certainly brothers, separated not by choice, but by the brutal hierarchy that defined plantation life during that violent age. Such a revelation transformed the photograph entirely. It was no longer a staged display of dominance. It was an unintentional confession, one that revealed a plantation master enslaving his own son while presenting him as mere property. Still, conjecture was insufficient. They required records, ledgers, testimonies, any surviving documents capable of confirming the lineage implied by those eerily similar faces. History demanded more than guesswork before judgment could be spoken aloud. They plunged into archival databases, tracing plantation ownership, family lines, and documented transactions. Each discovery deepened the portrait's gravity, reshaping it from artifact into evidence locked within a rigidly constructed world of oppression. They found the plantation master's records, detailing vast acreage and hundreds of enslaved workers. Among them appeared the servant's name, listed coldly beside his assigned duties, absent any indication of the blood connection now suspected. The heir, meanwhile, appeared frequently in public documents, privileged, respected, and shielded by the era's expectations. Nowhere did official records acknowledge another son, especially one conceived through exploitation and denied identity. Days of research revealed disturbing notations. Plantation logs mentioned the servant's unusual resemblance to the master's family. One entry ordered he be kept away from visitors to prevent questions that might expose the master's concealed crimes. This marked the first undeniable proof that the truth had been known within the household. The master recognized his son's likeness and feared anyone noticing the inheritance written across the young man's face. The archivist's chest tightened as he read those records. The cruelty of enslaving one's own son transcended simple brutality. It represented a deliberate attempt to erase a life while still exploiting it fully. As the investigation grew heavier, the photograph seemed to change under their gaze. What once looked like a hollow display now vibrated with suppressed meaning, a frozen argument between two brothers shaped by forces neither controlled. The servant's eyes especially revealed something new, an almost imperceptible message directed at the future, as though he anticipated someone would one day study this image and finally understand what had been stolen from him. The archivist scanned the portrait at extreme resolution, pushing the limits of modern equipment. Layer after layer of detail emerged, textures clarifying into sharp relief. Only then did the photograph unveil something astonishing. The servant's hands, clasped at his waist, were not empty. Hidden between his palms lay a folded piece of paper, impossibly small, yet deliberately held as though it carried the only truth he could protect. The archivist's pulse surged. That paper had survived. Its edges peeked from his fingers with subtle defiance. The servant had smuggled a message into a portrait meant to erase him, embedding resistance directly into the master's staged illusion. The forensic specialist stared in disbelief. The object was unmistakable. Whatever that paper contained, the servant had risked everything to keep it close, guarding it during a moment when surveillance and control were absolute. The archivist understood immediately. The anonymous sender had known this secret, urging them to look beyond the surface. Someone had preserved the paper itself, waiting decades before revealing it to the world. This realization shifted the investigation into something far more urgent. If the hidden document existed, it held the power to confirm lineage, expose brutality, and reclaim the servant's identity from the silence imposed upon him. The archivist set aside the portrait and focused on tracing the anonymous donor. Past estate sales, auctions, and transfers of family property became crucial. Somewhere within that history lay the individual who had safeguarded the truth. Searches through public and private records finally yielded a clue: an estate sale from decades earlier involving a descendant of the plantation heir. The portrait had likely changed hands then, bundled into forgotten family remnants. The archivist posted inquiries, careful not to reveal too much. He hoped someone connected to that sale might recall unusual documents or confidential materials acquired quietly. Patience became an essential part of the work. After days of silence, a single message appeared from an untraceable address. The sender confirmed ownership of additional materials, including the folded paper seen in the servant's hands. They offered to deliver everything discreetly. The archivist felt a mix of dread and gratitude. Someone had carried this truth privately for 30 years, waiting for the right moment to release it. Their fear revealed how powerful and dangerous such truth remained. A meeting place was arranged. The archivist prepared equipment, documentation tools, and protective materials, knowing the upcoming encounter could reshape the entire narrative surrounding this long-buried injustice. On the appointed day, the specialist joined him at the archive facility. Both men carried the weight of expectation, aware they stood on the brink of uncovering a story the portrait had fought to reveal since its creation. A knock sounded precisely at the arranged time. A staff member delivered a simple box, no name, no details, nothing to identify the courier. The donor had vanished without offering even a glimpse of themselves. Inside the box lay several wrapped items. But the archivist's breath caught when he found the smallest one, wrapped in multiple layers, labeled with a message written in steady, careful handwriting. This is what he was holding. The box felt heavier than expected, as though history itself resisted being lifted again. The archivist steadied his breath before peeling back the final layer of tissue, uncertain whether he was ready for what waited beneath. Inside rested a collection of objects arranged with reverent care. Diaries, letters, a battered family Bible, and finally the folded scrap of paper the servant once concealed between trembling hands. Time had weakened it, but truth endured. The forensic specialist leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment. He knew documents like this could collapse carefully constructed reputations, replacing old narratives with ones forged from pain, lineage, and long-silenced confessions too explosive for their era. The archivist unfolded the brittle paper slowly, supporting it with archival board. Faded ink revealed a stark confession written in the plantation master's unmistakable hand, admitting that the young servant was his blood, born through violence and secrecy. The words carried staggering weight. The master acknowledged him as a son yet refused him recognition, freedom, or even a surname. Instead, he enslaved the boy, allowing society to believe he stood beside a stranger, not a brother. The forensic specialist read the document twice, each line cutting deeper. It was not merely an admission of wrongdoing. It was a window into a mind torn between guilt and self-preservation, revealing moral decay concealed behind polished Southern gentility. The archivist exhaled shakily. This confession explained everything: the resemblance, the tension in the photograph, the careful effort to hide the young man from outsiders. The portrait had never shown two unrelated figures. It displayed a fractured family. They turned next to the plantation heir's diary, preserved with surprising completeness. His entries revealed irritation, confusion, and growing discomfort after learning the servant was his brother. The revelation challenged everything he had been raised to trust. The heir described the meeting in his father's study, where the master claimed repentance while refusing to acknowledge his son publicly. He instructed the heir to treat the servant with kindness, yet maintain the hierarchy that justified his enslavement. These contradictions fueled the heir's turmoil. His writing vacillated between cold entitlement and reluctant acknowledgement, exposing a mind unable to reconcile brotherhood with the ideology that shaped his entire world since childhood. The archivist felt unease rising. These men lived trapped in a system that demanded cruelty while masking it as order. Yet the younger son, the enslaved one, had found a way to carve defiance into the very image meant to erase him. The Bible deepened the narrative further. On a cramped margin, written decades after plantation life collapsed, the servant added his name beside the master and heir. He declared his lineage with quiet determination, refusing to let history omit him. The forensic specialist studied the handwriting, confirming it matched records from his later life. The servant's name had endured, anchored by ink he placed deliberately into a book that once belonged solely to the family that owned him. They documented each artifact thoroughly. The archivist photographed entries from every angle, ensuring preservation before attempting genealogical research. If descendants existed, modern science could finally prove what the photograph implied and the confession declared. The forensic specialist initiated searches through census data, Freedmen's Bureau records, and city registries. Little by little, the servant's path after freedom emerged, revealing a life rebuilt far from the estate that once held him captive. He traveled north, adopting the master's surname as an act of reclamation rather than tribute. He worked as a tailor, later teaching younger boys to read, determined to forge a legacy rooted in dignity instead of exploitation. The archivist found evidence of his marriage, children, and grandchildren. His sons carried forward his resilience, and their sons continued that line. The blood once denied recognition now thrived across generations, unaware of the full truth behind their origins. Meanwhile, the heir's lineage continued in the South, maintaining wealth and status untouched by the shadows buried in plantation outbuildings and sealed trunks. Their descendants walked into modernity carrying legends sculpted from silence rather than honesty. The archivist prepared to contact these families, anticipating resistance. Descendants of enslaved men often accepted hidden ancestry as possibility, while heirs of plantation elites battled fiercely to defend crafted reputations despite overwhelming evidence. When he reached out, reactions differed drastically. The servant's descendants responded with steadiness, saying their family whispered stories of a forefather denied by his own father. They had always sensed truth lingered behind hushed recollections and fractured memories. The heir's descendants split sharply. One rejected the investigation entirely, unwilling to accept generational cruelty woven into their bloodline. Another, more introspective, admitted sensing unresolved history within family lore and agreed to cooperate with the researchers. As DNA samples arrived, anticipation filled the archive laboratory. The forensic specialist prepared for comparative analysis, knowing the results could either confirm the historical revelations or complicate them further. Either way, the truth demanded exposure. The tests returned with unmistakable clarity. The heir and the servant were half-brothers, sharing a father with near-perfect certainty. The scientific verification echoed the admission written in the fragile confession paper the servant once clutched during the portrait session. The archivist felt overwhelming gravity as the results printed. This proof sealed the story, transforming the portrait from an ambiguous relic into undeniable testimony. The two men in that staged image had lived side by side as brothers divided by power. With confirmation in hand, the archivist drafted a comprehensive report detailing the investigation. He included photographic overlays, genealogical records, and transcribed confessions, ensuring no future scholar could dismiss the servant's silent rebellion or rightful inheritance. The forensic specialist finalized a presentation demonstrating how facial mapping and historical context intersected to uncover the truth. He emphasized that the servant's hidden paper represented perhaps the earliest surviving attempt at self-documentation under enslavement. Together, they prepared for public disclosure, anticipating difficult conversations. History rarely shifts gently, it fractures loudly, unsettling those who seek comfort in familiar narratives. Yet this truth demanded recognition to honor the man erased by his father's decisions. The archivist arranged an exhibition showcasing the portrait, the confession, and the servant's handwritten claim in the family Bible. He envisioned visitors confronting the image differently, understanding the silent tension between brothers separated by oppression. As preparations concluded, the archivist gazed once more at the servant's face. The young man's eyes no longer looked submissive. They carried intention, endurance, and unspoken defiance, proof he understood the weight of what he held in his hidden hands. The forensic specialist added final notes, acknowledging the courage required for the servant to carry that document during the portrait session. It represented a quiet victory, a refusal to let lies survive unchallenged, even within rigid structures of control. The portrait now revealed not only two men, but the fractured core of a family built on coercion. Through science, research, and persistence, the archivist had restored a truth intended to remain buried, honoring the son who fought to be remembered. As the chapter of discovery closed, the archivist knew the next steps would reshape modern understanding of plantation history. The photograph had spoken, its long silent testimony finally heard by those willing to listen without flinching. He gathered the documents carefully, preparing to share a story that once seemed destined for permanent silence. The truth was no longer hidden. The forbidden resemblance had revealed itself fully, and history would never view the portrait the same way again. The archivist lifted the diary first, its leather cracked like old skin, carrying the scent of a life lived too long in silence. Inside waited the plantation heir's private words, untouched for generations, yet trembling with unresolved truth. He opened to the first marked entry. The heir wrote with rigid formality, describing his father's failing health, his sudden moral unease, and a cryptic request to summon the young servant to his study behind closed doors. The heir confessed confusion about the meeting, noting the servant's strange expression afterward, a mixture of shock and sorrow that unsettled him deeply. He sensed something monumental had occurred, though he lacked the courage to confront it. The archivist continued reading. Days later, the heir wrote again, his tone fractured. His father had revealed that the servant was not merely a laborer, but his biological son, conceived through a violent act long buried beneath plantation respectability. The revelation shattered the heir's understanding of his household. He recorded feelings that fluctuated between guilt, disgust, and disbelief, struggling to reconcile affection for his father with the monstrous truth now unraveled before him. The archivist studied the handwriting. The heir never freed his brother. Instead, he carried the knowledge quietly, allowing structure and expectation to outweigh justice. His words exposed a man torn between conscience and the oppressive system shaping him. The next entry detailed the father's dying confession. He admitted everything in writing and handed the servant a folded document acknowledging their bloodline. The heir, terrified of scandal, begged him to destroy it, but the father refused. The archivist closed his eyes briefly. That refusal changed history. The servant kept the confession and carried it into the portrait session, shielding his truth in plain sight while standing beside the brother who could not defend him. He returned to the diary. Later pages revealed the heir's struggles interacting with the servant after the confession. He described subtle kindnesses he attempted, yet his language remained bound by centuries of entitlement and ingrained hierarchy. The archivist turned to the letters next, written between the heir and a distant cousin. The heir attempted to share his burden with someone outside the household, expressing shame for participating in a life built upon cruelty and concealment. The cousin responded cautiously, acknowledging the heir's turmoil but advising silence. Reputation mattered more to him than truth, and scandal threatened the entire family. He instructed the heir to stay composed and let secrets die quietly. The archivist felt a chill. These letters revealed how deeply society reinforced silence, how truth suffocated beneath expectations designed to protect powerful men from accountability while trapping their own sons in bondage. The Bible was next, worn from hands long departed. The archivist turned to the family record pages, where names etched across decades created a lineage of wealth, authority, and devastation disguised as tradition. Then he saw it. In the margin, squeezed beside official entries, the servant had written his origin. He named himself as the master's son and the heir's brother, claiming space that history tried relentlessly to deny him. The handwriting trembled but remained resolute. Beneath his name, he added a final note explaining he wrote the truth before leaving the plantation forever. It was not merely an entry. It was defiance etched into sacred family record. The forensic specialist examined the ink, confirming its age and authenticity. The servant's act had been deliberate, courageous, and symbolic, reclaiming identity through a medium reserved only for men deemed worthy by bloodlines they never questioned. The archivist held the Bible gently. He imagined the servant standing alone in that room, writing his truth into a book guarded by the very men who denied him dignity. That moment must have carried profound emotional power. Together, they photographed every page, building irrefutable documentation. These entries formed a triad of truth, confession, acknowledgement, and self-assertion. The evidence was overwhelming, intertwining personal testimony with physical artifacts. Next, they studied the servant's folded paper. It bore the master's trembling signature beneath the words admitting paternity and wrongdoing. Time had thinned the ink, but the truth remained sharp enough to cut through generations. The archivist imagined the servant holding this confession in the portrait, fingers curled tightly around the only written proof of his identity. That photograph immortalized a moment where silent rebellion intersected with forced obedience. The forensic specialist theorized that the servant hid the document during the portrait because he feared confiscation. If the heir or anyone else discovered it, the confession might vanish forever, leaving him voiceless once again. They found additional letters revealing the heir's resentment toward the document. He saw it as dangerous, a threat to inheritance, social standing, and the fragile stability of his world. Yet he could not bring himself to destroy it. The archivist realized the heir's turmoil did nothing for the servant's safety. Despite knowing the truth, he protected reputation over justice, maintaining outward hierarchy even while inwardly acknowledging shared blood. In one letter, the heir predicted the servant would leave the plantation once freedom became legally protected. He wrote this without anger, merely a resigned awareness that the man he called brother could no longer be held in chains. Another entry described the day the servant disappeared. He left quietly with a small bundle, taking the confession with him. The heir expressed relief and shame, admitting he lacked courage to offer help or apology. The archivist studied these words long after finishing the page. The heir's internal conflict represented a world collapsing under its own cruelty, while the servant stepped into a future built from nothing but determination and fractured memory. The forensic specialist traced the servant's journey through northern records. He found evidence of education, marriage, and a family built on hard-won freedom. The servant transformed pain into purpose, dedicating his life to teaching other young men. One document revealed the servant named his son after the master, not out of reverence, but reclamation. He reshaped a name tied to violence into one tied to legacy, resilience, and self-definition instead of servitude. The archivist collected these findings into a complete narrative, preparing to reveal them publicly. He understood the magnitude of what they discovered. A photograph once meant as propaganda had become unassailable testimony of buried truth. The forensic specialist reviewed every piece again, ensuring the story stood on unbreakable foundations. Every artifact aligned perfectly, constructing a timeline of pain, denial, resistance, and triumph that could no longer be dismissed. The archivist gazed again at the portrait. Now he saw brothers, not strangers. He saw a young man gripping the only proof of his identity, refusing erasure with a quiet act of extraordinary courage etched into silver and paper. He realized the portrait never depicted loyalty or harmony. It showed coercion, rebellion, and survival coexisting in frozen silence. It was no longer an artifact. It was a testimony demanding justice across time. With each document examined, the truth grew sharper. The evidence should not have survived, yet it did, because the servant protected it with his hands, his determination, and his belief that one day someone would finally listen. The archivist closed the final record, preparing for the next chapter of revelation. The world was about to confront a truth preserved by a young man who refused to disappear, even when everything around him tried to silence his name. The archivist stood before the exhibition hall just before opening, watching the portrait under controlled light. The two men inside it, once misunderstood shadows, now commanded attention through truth reclaimed from secrecy and generational silence. The photograph appeared unchanged, yet everything about it felt transformed. The young servant's clasped hands now held undeniable meaning, while the heir's distant stare revealed layers of conflict, denial, and responsibility history had long ignored. The archivist understood the image no longer belonged solely to scholars. It now belonged to the descendants, to communities shaped by forgotten pain, and to anyone willing to confront uncomfortable truths carved slowly through time. The first to arrive were the servant's descendants, carrying quiet pride mixed with solemn expectation. They approached the portrait slowly, absorbing the weight of a legacy finally clarified after generations of whispered stories and unanswered questions. One descendant stepped closer, touching the glass gently. He whispered that his family had always sensed a hidden history behind their ancestors' silence, but they never imagined written proof of his lineage had survived the plantation's collapse. Moments later, the heir's introspective descendant entered, carrying visible tension. He studied the portrait without stepping back, acknowledging the shared bloodline while battling the discomfort of learning his heritage included betrayal, exploitation, and generational wrongdoing. The archivist observed both families standing together, separated by history, yet connected by ancestry. Their meeting embodied a reconciliation the two brothers in the photograph never experienced, a moment bridging centuries of fractured identity. Finally, the destruction of false narratives began. The archivist presented the father's confession, the marginal Bible entry, and the servant's preserved document. Each artifact shattered long-standing myths crafted to protect reputations rather than reveal truth. The specialist explained the facial mapping results, showing how science confirmed what the servant risked everything to preserve. Shared bone structure, genetic markers, and historical context aligned perfectly, forming an irrefutable chain of evidence across eras. The heir's descendant exhaled slowly, acknowledging that his family benefited from secrecy. He admitted the truth confronted him with shame, grief, and responsibility, yet he vowed to ensure the past would never again be buried. The servant's descendants listened respectfully, neither seeking vengeance nor absolution. They wanted recognition. They wanted their ancestors' voice restored. They wanted the world to honor the courage of a man nearly erased by his own father. A private conversation followed. The families asked questions, shared emotions, and confronted the complexities of inherited pain. No anger erupted, only an unexpected resolve to face the truth with integrity and mutual understanding. The archivist realized the moment represented more than reconciliation. It demonstrated the power of preserved evidence to disrupt misconceptions, heal wounds, and remind descendants of the humanity denied to their ancestors by oppressive systems. The exhibition opened to the public, drawing crowds from across the country. Visitors approached the portrait with reverence, reading the panels describing how one young man defied erasure by clutching forbidden truth during a staged photograph. School groups, historians, and journalists gathered around the display. Many paused longest at the folded confession, realizing its fragile paper carried the weight of a family's buried history and a nation's unresolved reckoning. The archivist watched strangers react with emotion. Some bowed their heads quietly. Others placed hands over their hearts, mourning the young man's stolen identity while admiring his courage to preserve a truth no one else dared acknowledge. The forensic specialist delivered a public lecture, describing how historical artifacts can reveal stories institutions once suppressed. He emphasized the servant's hidden paper as a symbol of resilience against overwhelming control and coerced silence. Media coverage spread rapidly. Documentaries, articles, and educational programs emerged, transforming the portrait from obscure relic to centerpiece of national dialogue. Academics debated its implications for understanding lineage, responsibility, and the legacy of enslavement. The archivist fielded countless interviews, always centering the servant's bravery. He described the moment captured in the photograph as a quiet rebellion, a deliberate act of preservation during a time when survival itself demanded calculated restraint. Descendants of both families participated in discussions, offering perspectives shaped by their individual experiences. The servant's descendants spoke of pride. The heir's descendants spoke of accountability and the responsibility of carrying difficult truth forward. The archivist also shared the story of how the portrait resurfaced. The anonymous donor's courage to reveal hidden materials became part of the narrative, demonstrating how confronting history often begins with a single act of conscience. Researchers across the country sought guidance for re-examining other plantation archives, hoping to uncover similar stories buried in forgotten trunks, lost ledgers, and mislabeled boxes. The photograph inspired a movement to investigate silenced lives. Meanwhile, the archivist found himself returning to the portrait daily. Each glance revealed new shades of emotion, fear, determination, quiet triumph. The servant's gaze now seemed directed at everyone willing to finally acknowledge him. He imagined the brothers standing side by side, both aware of the truth one clutched yet unable to speak it aloud. The portrait had captured not just two figures, but a moment where oppression collided with silent defiance. The archivist reflected on the master's confession. It revealed a man haunted by guilt, yet unwilling to act justly. His admission, while truthful, highlighted the tragedy of a man who recognized his wrongdoing too late to repair it. The heir's conflicted writings further illustrated generational damage. His inability to act reflected a society built on moral contradictions, demanding loyalty to a system even when that system shattered the humanity of his own brother. The servant, however, chose different paths. He carried the confession, carved his name into the Bible, and reclaimed his lineage. His journey north built a legacy grounded in dignity, education, and resilience rather than inherited violence. The archivist found comfort knowing the servant's life after freedom thrived, despite the brutality he endured. His descendants grew from the foundation he built, strengthening a story once torn apart by coercion and secrecy. The exhibition's final panel displayed a line from the servant's Bible entry, "I add my name because I am family." Visitors lingered longest here, absorbing the magnitude of a man asserting identity in a world designed to deny it. The archivist hoped future generations would understand this story not as isolated tragedy, but as testament to countless men erased by systems built on exploitation. The portrait served as a rare window into that truth. As closing night approached, he dimmed the gallery lights and stood alone with the portrait. The servant's eye seemed sharper in the quiet, as though urging him to continue telling stories history once refused to acknowledge. The archivist whispered a promise into the room, vowing the truth would remain visible. The brothers' story would no longer hide behind polite narratives or sanitized history. Their voices would continue echoing long after the exhibition ended. He believed the servant would have wanted this, a world where his identity, courage, and lineage finally received recognition denied to him in life. Legacy, once bound by secrecy, now rose unrestrained and irreversible. The archivist closed the gallery door slowly. Behind him, the portrait remained illuminated beneath a single light, glowing like a beacon. Two brothers, once divided by brutality, now stood united in truth, forever reshaping the history they left behind.